Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Valentine's Day, 2013. Peoria, Illinois. The air was cold, the streets quiet, and families were preparing for what should have been a holiday of love. But inside one suburban home, something was wrong. The decorations by the entryway still hung, but nothing looked touched. Too neat, too staged. Within minutes, this address on West Mossville Road would be logged as a crime scene. A woman, Denise Leuthold, would never celebrate Valentine's Day again. Investigators built their first timeline almost immediately, from school drop-off at 12:20 p.m. to the 911 call placed around 3 o'clock p.m. Every movement mattered. Patrol officers knew that in homicide work, minutes could either eliminate or implicate entire stories. That afternoon, they began writing the clock into evidence. At 12:20 p.m., Denise had finished dropping her youngest child at kindergarten. She returned home to her parents' house, where she was living at the time. Neighbors later confirmed they saw nothing unusual outside the residence. No signs of forced entry, no suspicious vehicles waiting at the curb. That gap between 12:25 and 3 o'clock p.m. became the critical window. No phone activity from Denise, no messages, a silence investigators would later mark as negative evidence, the kind of absence that speaks louder than data. Just before 3 o'clock p.m., dispatch logged a 911 call reporting a burglary at the Mossville Road home. Units rolled out, sirens breaking the quiet afternoon. When they arrived, what they found raised suspicion immediately. The drawers in the kitchen were not rifled through but carefully placed on the floor. Electronics remained untouched. Cash still sat where it always did. If this was a burglary, it was unlike any other. Patrol entered and moved toward the front hallway. There, Denise lay just inside the entry. A single gunshot wound to the head, no sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no chaos that usually follows a forced entry gone wrong. One shot delivered with precision in a house that otherwise looked undisturbed. It was too clinical, too exact. Officers secured the scene and began canvassing. The first anomaly outside, the family vehicle was gone. Within the hour, that car would be located at Robinson Park, only a few miles away. Parked, abandoned, with fleece gloves nearby. That vehicle relocation immediately shifted the focus. Whoever committed this act had taken time not just to stage the house, but also to move the car. Staging inside, staging outside. Investigators logged everything. They photographed the drawers. They noted the absence of footprints in the muddy rear yard. They marked the location of the keys, under Denise's head, not in her hand, not on a counter. They bagged the gloves from the park. Nothing was left undocumented because the scene already looked manipulated. When a scene looks too neat, every detail becomes potential evidence. For the responding officers, the questions were immediate. Was Denise targeted by an intruder? Or was the burglary nothing more than a cover? And why Valentine's Day? Was it coincidence or part of the plan? These questions would not be answered that night, but the groundwork was set. The minute sheet, the anomalies, and the negative evidence created the first framework of this case. As darkness approached, the scene remained locked down. Detectives prepared for the next stage, handing Denise's body over for forensic examination. Autopsy would confirm trajectory, range, and manner of death. The lab would test clothing, residue, and shell casings. The case would soon leave the walls of the home and move into the controlled environment of the morgue. With the house sealed and logged, the case moves to a controlled room where measurements, not impressions, decide what happened. The transfer begins before dawn on February 15, 2013. According to police reports and coroner documentation, the body of Denise Leuthold, 39, arrives at the Peoria County morgue with sealed evidence tags, photographed clothing, and a chain of custody form already bearing multiple signatures. Technicians record the decedent's height, weight, identifying marks, and the condition of clothing. A standard property inventory is completed. Hands are bagged on arrival to preserve potential trace. The bags are removed only after swabbing is authorized. All of this is routine, and that is the point. Routine preserves cases. The pathologist conducts a systematic external exam first. There are no classic defensive wounds on the forearms and hands, no patterned abrasions on the knuckles, no fresh scratches that suggest a fight. The face and scalp are inspected under strong light. Soot deposition, muzzle imprint characteristics, and stippling are documented around a single entrance wound to the head. According to court filings and later trial testimony, the features are consistent with a contact or near-contact gunshot. When a muzzle is close, gases and soot can enter with the projectile. The pattern tells distance better than witness memory ever could. Internal exam confirms a single destructive wound path with no exit. The bullet fragments are recovered along the track, placed into a clean, labeled container, and sealed. Surrounding tissue is saved for histology. The trajectory and wound morphology align with a shot delivered just inside the front entry, consistent with the scene's initial measurements and photographs, not with a moving struggle deep inside the house. That alignment, entry location, wound mechanics, and lack of ransack trauma will matter later because it narrows the scenario space without naming a shooter. Time of death estimation relies on temperature, rigor, lividity, and last known alive anchors. Here, according to contemporaneous media and reports, the medical opinion is framed conservatively. The window from shortly after 12:25 p.m. to the period before the 911 call near 3:00 p.m. is consistent with observed post-mortem changes. That medical window neither proves nor excludes any single person. It simply validates the investigative clock built in Chapter 1. If you're watching at home, note how medical timing should line up with scene timing. When clocks agree, theories get quieter. Clothing is processed as evidence. Each garment is air-dried, if required, paper-bagged, and sealed. Swabs are taken from the entrance wound margin for possible blowback testing. Fingernail clippings or scrapings are collected. Hair standards are pulled for comparison. A gunshot residue GSR kit is not taken from the victim's hands because the forensic question here is not whether she fired, it's whether someone else did, and that determination turns on other items in the case file. The absence of GSR sampling from the victim does not harm the case. It avoids noise. Toxicology is ordered as a matter of medical completeness. Volatiles, common incapacitating agents, and therapeutic drugs are screened. The autopsy's cause of death is certified as a single gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death is homicide. Those are clean, declarative findings that meet the requirements of both medicine and law. No speculation is offered about motive or offender identity at this stage, because that is not the morgue's job. After the internal exam, the projectiles and any jacket fragments are weighed and measured. Rifling characteristics are described if present. The evidence container is signed, dated, and sealed for transfer to the State Police Laboratory. Chain of custody continues unbroken, originating detective to evidence custodian to lab courier. The forms include timestamps, badge numbers, and seal numbers. Jurors rarely see those forms up close, but their integrity protects every conclusion that follows. A brief word about range. Contact and near contact are not dramatic words. They are technical ones. They suggest the muzzle was close enough for gas and soot to imprint and injure skin at the entrance site. In a staged burglary where nothing else is touched, a close-range headshot at an entryway communicates control and planning rather than panic. Investigators do not have to say the word execution for a jury to understand what a single close shot implies. Still, the report doesn't overreach. It states what can be measured and nothing more. The autopsy photographs are taken along a standard series: overall body, intermediate distance, close-ups with scale. The injuries are documented before and after cleaning. The medical examiner records the wound axis relative to anatomical planes. These measurements allow scene analysts to test whether the shot could have come from a given position inside the entry hall. Later, that will be compared against body position in the first responder photos to ensure nothing moved prior to documentation. Precision in this step prevents claims that the scene was misread. On completion, the body is released per protocol. The evidence, including projectile fragments, swabs, and a sealed clothing set, moves under signature to the Illinois State Police Lab. The morgue's role is done. Identify injuries, recover ballistics material, establish cause and manner, and support the timeline with medical anchors. If you've followed Dateline or 48 Hours, you know that clean handoffs win cases as much as dramatic testimony. Here, the handoffs are clean. From an investigative perspective, 3 takeaways leave this room with the evidence. 1. The single close-range head wound is consistent with an indoor controlled shooting. 2. There is no medical evidence of a fight. And 3. The time of death window agrees with the minute sheet built from cameras, receipts, and calls. An investigator watching this come together might put it this way: the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. In towns like Peoria, Murders aren't just crimes, they collapse the sense that ordinary routines are safe. The human part is simple and brutal. A mother is dead in a place that should have protected her. What's next is not speculation, it's testing. The fragments and casings must be compared at the lab. If they track to a Glock family profile, that still isn't the finish line. Analysts will ask what specific weapon could have created those marks and where that weapon went. They will also check Denise's clothing for trace that might speak to shooter position or post-shot contact. Meanwhile, detectives will map the morgue's trajectory findings against measurements at the front entry. With medical facts fixed and evidence sealed for transfer, the investigation returns to the structure and the vehicle. Every trace and pattern at the house now has to agree with what the body already told us. With the autopsy complete and the medical facts fixed, attention returned to the house on West Mossville Road and to the car found off-site. According to police reports and contemporaneous media, the processing team treated the structure as a controlled grid: doorway, foyer, kitchen, hall, each sector photographed, measured, and logged before a single item was moved. The goal was simple: see whether the physical environment agreed with what the body had already told us. Entry points came first. Technicians documented broken glass and the condition of the latch assembly, then compared those photographs with the distribution of debris on the interior floor. They noted dust patterns, scuff heights, and whether fragments lay where gravity would naturally place them or where a hand might have arranged them. In the kitchen, drawers sat on the floor in a way that didn't match frantic rummaging. The surfaces were largely undisturbed. High-value electronics remained. Cash was still present. Scene notes captured these quiet anomalies without speculation, because the language of a staged burglary is best spoken by objects left untouched. At the threshold where Denise Leuthold was found, the team mapped the entryway with laser measurements. Trajectory rods were not inserted at the house, that's for later demonstrations, but distances to walls, the door swing arc, and floor features were recorded so they could be compared to the pathologist's wound axis. A set of keys was located beneath the victim's head, documented in situ and collected. That position mattered. Keys typically travel in pockets, on counters, or in a hand. Underbody placement suggested movement or deliberate positioning after the shot. No conclusion was written into the log. The fact was, a second track unfolded at Robinson Park. The missing vehicle was recovered there, parked without obvious collision damage. Officers taped off a perimeter that included a bench and a nearby trash receptacle. Fleece gloves were observed and bagged with fresh paper, then labeled for latent print processing, DNA screening, and possible gunshot residue testing if supported by context. An additional set of keys was recovered from refuse near the vehicle location. According to court filings, the chain of custody for these items was uninterrupted. Each seal number and signature aligned from field to property room to lab courier. Inside the car, crime scene personnel photographed every surface before touch: steering wheel, shift knob, door pulls, seat controls, and floor mats. Swabs and tape lifts were taken from high-contact zones. Fibers were preserved from seats and the trunk lining. The odometer reading and fuel level were recorded. Investigators compared the parking orientation to park access routes, estimating how quickly a driver could leave the car and exit on foot without crossing open sightlines. That mattered for one reason. The morgue findings suggested a close, controlled shot at the home, and moving the car afterward would extend the operation into public space. Risk increases with each extra step. Back at the house, a black hooded sweatshirt was collected from a bedroom shared space. Lab results later reported gunshot residue on the right cuff, a finding admitted at trial. The report specified method, controls, and the limitations of GSR analysis. It can indicate proximity to a firearm discharge or secondary transfer, but it must be weighed with the rest of the file. Here it joined the morgue's distance estimate and the scene's orderly look, forming a pattern of control rather than panic. When patterns multiply, alternative explanations shrink. Neighborhood canvas paired with the physical sweep. Detectives documented prior suspicious vehicle mentions in the area and pulled available residential cameras. Most captures helped the timeline from Chapter 1. Vehicles at commercial stops, not strangers at the back fence, and none contradicted the negative finding of no footprints in the muddy rear yard of the house. That absence held. It is subtle, but in winter ground, mud keeps secrets badly. If someone ran through, you usually see it. The car's relocation to Robinson Park became the day's central question. Was it an attempt to buy time, to suggest that Denise had left on an errand, or to create distance between the shot and the driver? Analysts plotted the route from the home to the park, clocked the drive, and compared that duration to the 911 time anchor. When those numbers were overlaid with the autopsy's time of death window, the sequence looked tight but workable for a single actor. As one investigator put it during a review, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Items moved from scene to lab with signatures and timestamps. Gloves, keys, the hoodie, swabs, lifts, and interior car samples. No single piece closed the loop, but together they began to resolve whether a real burglar had exposure to the property. According to court filings, the absence of ransack, the key placements, the off-site car, and the GSR result would later be presented as a coherent set. It is not dramatic, it is cumulative. In towns like Peoria, murders aren't just crimes, they disrupt routine. Precision is how routine is rebuilt. By the time technicians finished with the structure and the vehicle, analysts were already lining up screens, receipts, and call logs. The goal was straightforward. Either find a digital footprint for an unknown intruder between early afternoon and the 911 call, or prove that window was clean. In a modern homicide, clocks live in more than one place: cash register time, camera time, carrier time, and when they agree, speculation shrinks. Commercial footage came first. According to police reports and contemporaneous media, the husband's public stops on February 14, 2013 were verified in sequence by receipts and cameras. A bank visit in the morning block, a fuel stop at 10:41 a.m., coffee around late morning, another coffee near Grand Prairie in the early afternoon, and a car wash ending at approximately 2:33 p.m. Each clip was cataloged with download metadata and a screenshot index so that later, in court, an analyst could testify without ambiguity. What mattered wasn't the brand names, it was the minute stamps. They put him in public view up to the mid-afternoon threshold. Carrier extractions focused on the narrow slice just before and after those public images. Forensic examiners documented a call and text burst between 2:31 and 2:37 p.m. with Ana, a woman connected to the family. Some items had been deleted at the handset level but were recovered through standard forensic techniques. Others appeared in the carrier detail. The report did not assign motive to those messages, it assigned time. When you anchor communications to known camera sightings, you learn whether a person was plausibly tied up, or whether minutes remain unaccounted for. Computer forensics added a different kind of timestamp. Imaging of a household laptop located user activity roughly between 11:03 and 11:29 a.m. the same day, including searches about suppressing gunshots and chemical incapacitation. Analysts documented system clock settings, browser artifacts, and the last executed entries. Those queries did not prove who typed them at that moment, but they did fix that someone sitting at that machine was researching methods that aligned with the medical examiner's later finding of a single close-range shot. The value here was thematic consistency across domains, screen to scene, not just words on a monitor. The analyst then looked outward, asking a simple question. If a stranger had entered 700 West Mossville Road between 12:25 p.m. and the time of the 911 call, would we expect to see any digital trace nearby? Doorbell systems and neighborhood DVRs in 2013 were not ubiquitous, so the answer wasn't guaranteed. Even so, detectives cross-checked the canvas captures, the park traffic flows, and the approach roads. The logs showed routine traffic and the family's own movements. They did not show an independent digital trail for an unknown burglar during the critical window. That absence, paired with untouched valuables and lack of rear yard prints already logged, didn't name a suspect, but it narrowed the scenarios that still fit. It is worth pausing on the nature of deletions. Deleted messages or call logs do not make a person guilty. They do, however, invite a follow-up question. What was removed and when? In this file, recovered artifacts around the 2:31 to 2:37 p.m. period became anchors for later interviews, not to force a confession, but to test stories. If a person claims to be in one place, and a recovered text suggests opportunity for movement in another, the contradiction isn't personal, it's mechanical. Jurors trust mechanics. Analysts were careful to keep the error straight. This was 2013, not an age of persistent app location trails or routine GPS history on every device. The digital backbone here was traditional, retail cameras, bank timestamps, phone company records, and a cloned laptop drive. Investigators avoided overpromising. They didn't claim live tracking data that didn't exist. They used what they had and marked what they didn't. That restraint preserved credibility and prevented defense counsel from attacking exaggerated claims. When the three domains were overlaid, commercial video through 2:33 p.m., communications clustered, 2:31 to 2:37 p.m., and research activity around late morning, the minute sheet from earlier chapters hardened. The morgue's time of death window remained compatible with the digital footprint. The car's later appearance at Robinson Park also held its place in sequence. Nothing in the carrier records or cameras contradicted an immediate post-incident move. As one detective summarized during an internal review, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. In other words, the story told by screens and clocks left very little room for a chaotic intruder narrative. All of this built pressure for the next step. Statements. Digital evidence rarely answers why, but it sets boundaries for what could have happened. When those boundaries tighten, investigators listen more closely to words, errands, timing, who called whom, and why some messages were missing. In towns like Peoria, murders aren't just crimes. They disturb routines that make a community feel predictable. Clear, documented time is how you restore a little of that predictability, even when the outcome is tragic. Detectives moved from clocks and lab readouts to words. The goal was straightforward: capture every material statement, pin it to a timestamp, and see what survives impact with the records. Interviews were scheduled the same day and again in the following weeks, with audio and video running and advisements handled on the record. No one was rushed. When you're measuring statements against minutes, patience is an investigative tool. The husband outlined a sequence anchored in errands: a morning bank stop, fuel, coffee, a midday loop tied to the Grand Prairie area, and a car wash ending near 2:33 p.m. He said he learned about the burglary on arrival and called 911. Detectives let the details breathe, then asked for anchors: which location first, which turnoff, which receipt goes with which stop. The questions were neutral because the answers would be tested by independent data already secured in Chapter 4. When the recording paused, analysts overlaid the narrative on the verified run sheet. Most public stops matched the cameras and receipts. The pressure points were the edges, the narrow window between the car wash timestamp and the 911 call, and the 2:31 to 2:37 p.m. communications cluster with Ina. Asked about contact with her that afternoon, he acknowledged messages but framed them as routine. Forensic examiners had already documented that some items in that period were deleted at the handset level and later recovered. In the room, detectives didn't accuse. They clarified what was discussed, why then, and whether any of it changed the route or timing he had just described. Statements about arriving to discover a chaotic break-in met the scene report head-on. Detectives described what had been documented: drawers placed rather than dumped, valuables left, no rear yard footprints in fresh mud, and the vehicle later found at Robinson Park. Without editorializing, they asked him to explain how a burglar would skip electronics and cash while moving the car off-site. He maintained that it looked like a burglary to him. The follow-ups were deliberately clinical: which entry point looked disturbed, where he first stood, how long he remained inside, what he touched. The specifics mattered because lab testing would later look for transfer and residue on surfaces he said he handled. Family and close contacts were interviewed to build context around ordinary schedules and stressors. Those statements established who typically had the keys, who used the shared computer, and how often Grand Prairie errands happened on weekdays. This wasn't character digging. It was logistics. If a person routinely moved through a route, the pattern appears on cameras and statements long before a homicide. If a route looks unusually dense on the single day a homicide occurs, that contrast can be probative at trial without implying motive. Ina's role required careful handling. Detectives documented the nature of her relationship to the family, lawful immigration sponsorship, and the frequency of contact. They asked about the 2:31-2:37 p.m. mark cluster and about any plans or discussions that day. Her answers were recorded and compared to the carrier logs and recovered handset artifacts. Where the timelines aligned, those points were locked. Where content was missing due to deletion, the records became placeholders, not conclusions. The question for the jury later wouldn't be whether messages were personal. It would be whether their timing intersected with opportunity. One more voice entered the file: A jailhouse witness who, according to court filings, later testified to hearing a sequence, parking at Robinson Park, a walk through woods, waiting inside a closet, and firing a single shot. Investigators treated this account as working information, not confirmed fact. They mapped it against the distance from the house to the park, the time needed to stage the vehicle, and the morgue's time of death window. Portions of the sequence matched the established scaffold, car at the park, close-range shot inside the entry, without proving authorship. The rest became leads to test rather than a story to adopt. Throughout, interview posture stayed measured. When the husband repeated that a burglary explained everything, detectives didn't debate. They documented phrasing, tense, certainty, proximity claims, and tied those lines to fixed exhibits. If he said he remained outside until officers arrived, they checked first in patrol notes for contact points. If he said he handled a particular drawer, they checked for latent prints and compared placement photos to his description. Words were never evaluated alone. They either found a match in the record or they didn't. By the end of this phase, the file contained 3 layers that would matter in court. First, the too neat interior and the off-site car, facts, not adjectives, were now paired with the speaker's description of a chaotic break-in. Second, the late afternoon handset activity and limited deletions occurred precisely where the timeline was tightest. Third, the jailhouse narrative overlapped with verified beats without supplying new, independent corroboration, which is why prosecutors would later present it with caution and a limiting instruction. The result wasn't drama. It was tension between clocks and claims. There's a human dimension that never leaves these rooms. Denise Leuthold's name stayed at the center of the paperwork, not as a symbol but as an anchor. In towns like Peoria, murders interrupt routines that families count on. That's why the work stays formal. The cleaner the record, the less room there is for rumor to fill the gaps. If you're watching and weighing this with us, ask yourself one thing as we turn the page. When words collide with minutes, which side gives? Investigators shifted from what happened to how it could have been prepared. The approach was methodical. Reconstruct the hours and purchases around February 14, 2013, compare them to the medical window, and test whether the afternoon errands looked like routine or like choreography. According to police reports, court filings, and contemporaneous media, receipts, surveillance pulls, and lab submissions were organized into a single sequence chart so each item could be read in context: amount, location, timestamp, and purpose where known. The verified public stops you've already seen: bank, fuel, coffee, Grand Prairie corridor, and a car wash ending near 2:33 p.m. were re-examined not for their existence but for their spacing. Analysts graphed dwell times and drive times between stops and measured the slack against the 911 call. On paper, the loop fit. On a map with real traffic estimates, it fit tightly. The conclusion wasn't dramatic. None of the receipts alone proved intent. But when plotted, the density of non-essential stops on a weekday afternoon, stacked on the single day Denise was killed, raised a planning question prosecutors would later argue as alibi padding. The term is legal shorthand: create a trail of small public sightings that anchor innocence while leaving a critical gap intact. Weapon analysis followed the paperwork. Ballistics had already characterized recovered fragments as consistent with a Glock family profile. Investigators documented that a household Glock, lawfully owned, was unavailable for testing. The absence was recorded neutrally, not seized, not produced, not submitted. In trial practice, jurors are taught to respect both what is present and what is missing. Here, the fragment's class characteristics aligned with a common platform, while the known household exemplar could not be compared. Defense theory can argue that common means many possible sources. Prosecution theory can argue that missing matters when the class matches. The file preserved both ideas without editorializing. The courtroom would resolve it. Computer forensics, already imaged and hashed, added detail to planning. The late morning cluster, 11:03 at 11:29 a.m., reflected searches about suppressing gunshots and chemical incapacitation. Examiners verified system clock accuracy, parsed browser artifacts, and noted last executed times. The phrasing in the lab report stayed cautious. The activity was present, the terms were as typed, and the times mapped to late morning on Valentine's Day. The medical examiner's conclusion of a single close-range shot later gave those searches narrative gravity for a jury, but the report itself remained a record of keys pressed and pages loaded. Receipts and surveillance around the Grand Prairie corridor offered another planning vector: opportunity to scout or to be seen. Coffee trips on their own don't signify crime. When you overlay them with the morgue's time of death window and the car's relocation to Robinson Park, the question becomes whether any stop meaningfully constrained the ability to return to West Mossville Road undetected. Analysts timed the fastest plausible route from the car wash to the residence, then to Robinson Park, then back into public view. The numbers were lean but viable for a single actor who understood the neighborhood and chose predictable roads. That conclusion didn't name anyone. It narrowed the scenarios that fit the medical, scene, and digital anchors. Financial records were reviewed for unusual pre-purchases: ammo, cleaning supplies, improvised suppressor materials. According to filings summarized at trial, no single receipt emerged as a smoking gun. Instead, the theme was consistency: a home with known access to a Glock platform, a Glock family bullet path, a weapon of that family unaccounted for, and browser activity that discussed how to reduce, report, or incapacitate a target. Planning in real cases is rarely cinematic. It often looks like small, ordinary actions that mean nothing until a timeline makes them mean something. Prosecutors later framed planning in 3 lines. First means access to a Glock-class firearm, missing exemplar, close-range delivery consistent with control. Second, method: a house that reads staged to suggest burglary, and a car planted at Robinson Park to draw attention away from the entryway. Third, mental state: search terms that track to suppressing sound and disabling a person typed within hours of the killing. The defense retains obvious counters. Class characteristics do not equal identity. Search terms do not equal action. Errands were ordinary. But the weight of a planning count isn't about any single column winning by itself. It's about alignment across columns inside the medical window. One practical note about planning evidence: courts watch chain of custody and juries watch restraint. The Peoria file documents how each digital artifact was imaged, hashed, and reported, how each receipt was authenticated, and how each CCTV clip was exported with time drift accounted for. That discipline kept the narrative from outrunning the proof. It also allowed detectives to avoid overclaiming. In a community shaken by a homicide on Valentine's Day, restraint is not just legal hygiene, it signals respect for the victim and for the public that will live with the outcome. And by the end of this phase, planning read less like a theory and more like a structure built from small parts: tightly spaced errands that left a workable gap, a weapon family match without a matching gun to test, and a computer that showed research consistent with a controlled, close-range shot. Denise Leuthold's name stayed on the header of every exhibit. That's not formatting. It's a reminder that all of this, timelines, fragments, search logs, exists because a mother was killed in her parents' home on a day designed for celebration. Precision honors that reality better than rhetoric ever could. With forensic results aligned, focus shifted to charging. Prosecutors had 4 main pillars: the autopsy showing a close-range shot, the entryway scene that looked staged, the victim's car found at Robinson Park with gloves and keys, and digital activity bracketing the time of death. Together, these built probable cause for first-degree murder. According to court filings, warrants secured more phone data, receipts, and firearm records. Labs verified hashes to preserve authenticity. Ballistics pointed to a Glock family weapon. The household Glock was missing, noted as means consistent, exemplar unavailable. Digital artifacts confirmed movements and deletions on February 14, 2013. Nathan Leuthold was arrested on March 6, 2013, booked without bond. The jailhouse account, one shot, staged car, was marked corroborative, not central. Interagency roles stayed local and state: Peoria Police, Peoria County Prosecutors, and the Illinois State Police Lab. Each handoff was logged to prevent defense challenges. The charging memo spelled out intent, deliberate close-range shot; preparation, research, timed errands, means, Glock access; and post-act conduct, deletions, staged burglary. The record left little room for an unknown intruder theory. Pre-trial hearings in Peoria set the rules. Browser searches about suppressing gunshots were admitted, as were ballistic fragments and scene photos, each with clear limits. Gunshot residue on a hoodie and a jailhouse witness account were allowed but flagged with cautionary instructions. The defense pressed issues of coincidence and transfer, while prosecutors stressed convergence, autopsy range, stage scene details, the car at Robinson Park, and deleted phone activity. In March 2014, jurors saw how medical, digital, and scene evidence lined up within minutes. Cross-examination tested each strand, but could not break the overall chain. After deliberation, the verdict was returned. Guilty of first-degree murder. The judge imposed 80 years in prison. Appeals did not change the outcome. Denise Leuthold lost her life on Valentine's Day 2013. Nathan Leuthold lost his freedom the year after. The record closes with clarity. Proof weighed, verdict reached, sentence imposed. Guilty, sentenced to 80 years. When multiple strands of evidence converge, do you think that strengthens justice or risks over-reliance on patterns in a crime? Looking back at Denise Leuthold's story, I'm reminded how fragile trust can be and how quickly silence can turn into tragedy. No family imagines Valentine's Day ending in violence, but this crime shows us that denial of warning signs has real consequences. Justice brought closure, yet the cost was irreversible loss. As someone sharing this with you, I ask, what lessons do you carry forward about honesty, control, and protecting the people closest to you? If this story reached your heart, let me know where you're watching from, or share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay with me through more true crime stories that uncover the hidden realities behind closed doors, please subscribe to the channel today.